Call it a trailer. Call it a hodgepodge. Call it a teaching aid. Call it strange if you like. Call it whatever you like. Here is a strange assembly of clips from an upcoming, arguably even stranger episode on my YouTube channel. This episode is about the life of the heart, kindling the heart. I think it was needed on this channel because Tomberg has so much beauty to impart about the life of the heart, and other episodes have focused on other things. But as I so often say, Meditations on the Tarot is 100 books rolled into one, and it's nothing if it's not a book about the heart and a book about love. And that is what is so supremely important in Tomberg's work. Its growth takes place through regular waves, which pass one after the other through your being. One wave of silence, followed by another wave of more profound silence. Then again, a wave of still more profound silence. Have you ever drunk silence? If in the affirmative, you know what concentration without effort is. And what I want to say about that is that some of us will recognize what Tomberg is speaking about in those words, some of us won't. But I do recognize what he's speaking about. I have drunk silence, and many of you will have as well. And what I have found in terms of drinking silence, it's not something that, I manage every day or anything like that, but I find that certain localities in time, like Christmastide, are ideal for concentration without effort or drinking silence. Or certain localities in space, like the sacred Catholic sites where the apparitions of the Sacred Heart or Our Lady happened, like Lourdes in France, the Rue de Bac, Knock in Ireland. These are places where I could enter ever more deeply into silence, or indeed monasteries. I'm in a European city at the moment. I feel so much tension, so much stress here. And I'm feeling the horror of a world that is less and less and less still. More agitated, more electrified, more buzzed, more wired. Tomberg is indeed about a response to the tidal wave of materialism that flooded across the world in this century. It means the 20th century, obviously, is far worse now in the 21st century. Which he says owes, and he's right, the outpouring of intellectual enlightenment during the age of rationalism in the 18th century, which paved the way for materialism. And he speaks about devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, had the task of rekindling the heart. We have to keep our hearts alive and feeling. There is so much in this world threatening to deaden our hearts. And it needs to be countered. Because as Tomberg continues, the soul, understood as the most refined and deepest life of the heart, is by no means certain of survival. This life of the heart isn't guaranteed. All kinds of dangers threaten, and destruction is an ever-present danger. The life of the soul has to be cultivated and stimulated. This concern with dehumanization informs all his writing and thinking. I mean, in his final Catholic writings, in Lazarus Come Forth, Tomberg warns of what he calls the centaur. The centaur being a beast that has a human head and a horse's body. And he uses this to invoke the idea or the danger of humanity losing feeling and becoming only thinking and willing. So the trinity of thinking, feeling, and willing is replaced by a binary where human beings can think in at least a technocratic way and have an animalistic, will, but with no heart, no feeling. There are certainly continuities between Steiner's thinking and Tomberg's thinking, and I repeat, there are also the most radical and stark discontinuities. But one of the continuities certainly is that Steiner was also seeing the same degeneration, the same dehumanization going on. Steiner was concerned in his own way with the binary, a being where the heart is dead. But you can think at least in some sort of technological way, and you can act like an animal. But you can't feel. Steiner believes that we are moving into incredible danger. And I just want to read you, ladies and gentlemen, a single sentence from Steiner that is relevant to everything we're saying on this episode, but it's really quite paradigmatic for Steiner, to be honest. It's like Steiner has 350 books. There's no way you can sum up all of Steiner's thinking in a single sentence. But if I had to choose a single sentence, to be honest with you, this one wouldn't be too bad. So I'll read it to you. Steiner said in 1912, "Without new spiritual impulses, technology will not only dominate outer life, but will overpower and numb us, driving out all religious, philosophical, artistic, and even ethical interests in the higher sense. Men would turn into something like living automata." And this is Steiner in 1912. Steiner, I think with great foresight, was seeing that this world that we're experiencing now was coming into being. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I said so much has changed in the last 15 years, and I was merely speaking about, the most obvious things, like the smartphones and the Facebook and, social media and all those things that, didn't exist or barely existed 15 years ago when I recorded that video. But, ladies and gentlemen, obviously, so much has changed just in the last 2 or 3 years. We are living in extraordinary times. So much New Age thought is about feel good. And indeed, it's very important to feel good when we are faced with beauty. But right now, we're in this world, you and me, surrounded by countless forms of horror and suffering. More and more, I feel asked to keep holding that, not to become depressed, not to become morose, but not to forget it, and to somehow feel it. It's one thing to say in an intellectual way, well, there are millions of children dying right now. But if my own child or your own child were dying in your own arms, that would be an entirely different thing. I find it useful to contemplate the difference between those two forms of cognition. An awareness where the head can say, well, of course, there's all kinds of suffering in this world. And then a form of contemplation where it's no longer a head process. And it feels as though through the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, I'm being given the grace of feeling the horror more and more deeply. In these holy nights, this is January the 4th, 2008, I've had the privilege of spending many of these holy nights since Christmas in Paray-le-Monial in France, the city of the Sacred Heart of Christ, and feeling that presence more and more deeply. I now want to pay this personal tribute to a man that I have called with total sincerity great. And the man I have in mind is Dr. Michael French. He was a German philosopher. More relevant to this, far more relevant, is that he was Valentin Tomberg's biographer. He co-wrote the German biography. He also, 40 years ago, translated Meditations on the Tarot from French into German. I considered him, until his rather unexpected sudden death recently, the world's leading authority on Valentin Tomberg. And as I mentioned before, I spoke about this in my huge episode where I spoke about my 25-year journey with Tomberg. I spoke about how I lived in Germany for a couple of years and really had the deep privilege of knowing Michael. And there's so much here, ladies and gentlemen. His sudden and unexpected passing has hit Kim and myself quite deeply. I've really spent time going through his writings, really thinking about all that he did, all that he was. I mean, really, what I want to say right up here, all that he was. As Kim and I have been in this process of thinking about Michael, praying for him, but as I've been, in my own personal process, going through his work, remembering him, remembering what he gave me all those years ago in Germany, I really need to say this quite sincerely. I believe he was one of the finest people I have ever met in my life. I say that with no sentimentality or exaggeration. He was a man of the heart. We've been speaking in this episode about the life of the heart. I've been speaking about how Tomberg was a profoundly human man, concerned with cultivating the life of the heart. Michael French was also concerned with cultivating the life of the heart, but he wasn't just talking his talk, he was walking it. Tomberg changed. And I have to say that this is one of my great concerns in many people working with Tomberg's legacy, that they're not aware of the radical difference between the anthroposophical Tomberg and the Catholic Tomberg. Michael was aware of that difference because he really dwelt and worked and pondered Tomberg. We need everything possible to cultivate the life of the soul and the life of the heart, because the life of the heart and the life of the soul, I agree with Tomberg, is in grave danger. But just because new things are needed to countermand new dangers, doesn't mean that you throw the church into the dustbin of history. Somewhere in, I think it's the 8th letter, Tomberg is speaking about the need for justice to the church. I know that a lot of the anger that's going on around the church that I think that some of my viewers will have, Tomberg writes that if you really understand what the church is, and you use the balance of justice, this is the 8th letter, the balance of justice, you will never throw stones at the church again. And I want to say a little bit about this balance of justice. I'm not unaware of the terrible things that members of the church on earth have done. But I'm aware of something else. Ladies and gentlemen, there are something like 400,000 Catholic priests in this world. And I don't know how many Orthodox priests there are. But Catholic priests are expected to celebrate the Eucharist every day. Now, not all of them live up to that. But I think we can safely guess that, a couple 100,000 times a day, somewhere on the planet, his body and his blood are becoming manifest on the altars of the Catholic Church, also the Orthodox churches of the East. This miracle is happening. What I'm doing in these videos on Tomberg is I'm testifying to the fact that I followed Tomberg into the church, and I found this miracle transforming me more than anything I ever found in anthroposophy, more than anything I ever found in the New Age. Yes, the church is in a terrible state. Tomberg also writes about the church regularly degenerating and then regenerating. And I agree with Tomberg that we're waiting for a regeneration of the church. This is why I think the issues around the liturgy are so important. I mean, another factor of Tomberg that more and more people are becoming conscious of now is that even when he was an anthroposophist back in the 30s, Tomberg was really participating in the Russian Orthodox liturgy, which was very unusual for an anthroposophist. Steiner was so on the track that we didn't need this, but even as an anthroposophist, Tomberg was participating in the Russian Orthodox liturgy. And after he becomes a Catholic, he says, we need the church. And if you don't really recognize that, you're in danger of becoming a parasite, because the church is feeding you. It's these, 200,000 times a day, his body and blood becoming manifest in the world.
Krishnamurti impressed me very deeply once when he said that any true feeling, any feeling that could be worth being called a feeling, would always have a corresponding action. What I take he meant by that is that there's a great deal of emotional masturbation. There's a great deal of ranting. There's a great deal of moroseness. There's a great deal of emotions that don't lead to action. And then there is real feeling. Feeling. One hopes, beginning to feel, just beginning to feel, the horror of the world. And a real feeling like that, it seems to me, will lead to some kind of concrete action. Action to change oneself. Action, if one is a Catholic, as I am, to go to the Eucharist, to go to Mass, and bring myself to Christ. More and more, I'm given the grace of this notion of trying to bring myself to Christ. I feel so feeble and feel so weak. I am aware of such capacity for hypocrisy here. I speak about real feeling leading to action, and yet how little action do I really take?